On the morning of April 29th, 1969, Leonard Pruitt's 1952 vintage red row crop tractor threw a hydraulic hose on the south field at 6:15 in the morning, 2 hours before the planting window opened on what the forecast said would be the last dry week before a wet May closed the season. Leonard was 38 years old. He had been farming 360 acres of Champaign County, Illinois corn and soybeans since he took over from his father in 1958. He had a planter on the toolbar, a field ready, and a hydraulic hose weeping fluid into the black Illinois soil. He drove back to the shop. He found the hose in the parts cabinet. He kept a spare of every hose on every implement and tractor on the farm, a practice his father Alton had established in 1941, and that Leonard had continued without exception. He replaced the hose in 22 minutes. He was back in the field by 7:10, an hour before the window opened. He planted that day. He planted the following day. He finished the south fields by May 3rd, 2 days before the rain came and shut down planting across the county for 11 days. His neighbor across the road, a man named Phil Custer, had started planting the same morning Leonard had lost the hydraulic hose. Phil's planter had gone down with a broken shear bolt in the drive chain at noon. Phil had not kept a spare. He had driven to the farm equipment dealer in Urbana 40 minutes each way, waited for the part, driven back. He had lost 4 hours. He had made up some of it. He had not made up all of it. When the rain came on May 5th, Phil had 60 acres still to plant. He planted them in late May when the field dried. Those 60 acres yielded 18 bushels per acre, less than the ground he had planted on time. Leonard had kept the spare hose. The difference between Leonard's outcome and Phil's outcome on that specific day was a hose fitting in a parts cabinet. Let me tell you about Alton Puit, because what Alton said and what Alton built is the reason Leonard had the hose fitting in the cabinet on April 29th, 1969. Alton Puit had started farming the Champaign County ground in 1932 at the bottom of the Depression with a worn-out tractor he had bought for $180 at an estate sale and a determination that the farm would not fail on a mechanical problem he could have prevented. He had watched neighboring operations lose days to equipment failures during the critical planting and harvest windows of the early 1930s, watched men drive to dealers for parts that could have been on the shelf in the shop, watched crops planted late or harvested late because a machine had failed in the way machines fail when they are not maintained and not prepared for failure. He had made a rule for himself that he never articulated as a rule because Alton was not the kind of man who articulated things. He simply did them. He kept a spare of every wear item on every piece of equipment. He changed oil before it needed changing rather than after. He adjusted the valves on the tractor every spring before planting and every fall after harvest, not because they were failing, but because keeping them in specification prevented them from failing. He greased every fitting on every implement before every season and after every use in wet conditions. He did these things the way he breathed, not as decisions, as habits. He had said one thing to Leonard about all of this once, when Leonard was 14 years old and had been helping Alton work through the spring maintenance list. He had said, "Take care of the tractor, and the tractor will take care of you." He had said it the way a man says something obvious, not as instruction, but as observation. He had gone back to greasing the disc bearings. Leonard had been 14. He had heard it. He had not needed to hear it twice. He had been watching his father do it for 14 years already. Let me tell you about what that sentence actually means in practice across 45 years of farming, because the sentence is simple and the practice is not simple, and the gap between them is where most farmers fall short. Taking care of the tractor the way Alton meant it and the way Leonard practiced it means 4 specific things. The first is scheduled maintenance done on the schedule rather than when it is convenient. Oil changes at 100 hours, not at 120 or 150, because it has been a busy week, and he will get to it. Valve adjustments in April before planting begins, not in May after planting is underway and stopping seems costly. Filter changes when the filter is due, not when the filter shows signs of failure. The schedule is the commitment. The schedule is the thing that makes the tractor predictable. A tractor maintained on schedule fails in predictable ways at predictable intervals. A tractor maintained when convenient fails in unpredictable ways at the most inconvenient possible times. During planting, during harvest, during the specific window when the weather and the crop and the market align, and losing 2 days costs more than any repair. The second is parts inventory. Alton had kept in a set of wooden drawers he had built himself on the shop wall a spare of every hose, belt, fitting, and wear item on every tractor and implement on the farm. Not a complete engine rebuild kit. Not 6 of everything. 1 spare of every item that was likely to fail during a critical window, and that would require a dealer trip to replace. The inventory had taken him several seasons to build, and it had cost real money. In the early years, after the first time it saved a planting day, he had never questioned the cost. Leonard had maintained the inventory the same way, adding a spare when he used the last one, checking the drawers every spring before planting started, replacing anything that had aged beyond reliable shelf life. The third is knowing the equipment. Alton had said it differently from most farmers. He had not said, know how to fix everything. He had said, know what the tractor sounds like when it is right, so you can hear when it is wrong. He had meant the time to address a problem is when it first shows itself as a sound or a feeling or a small symptom, not when it shows itself as a failure. A vintage red farm tractor pulling slightly heavier than usual on the north field. When the field conditions have not changed, that is the engine telling you the carburetor is running lean or the valve clearances are tightening up. A hydraulic system that takes an extra half second to raise the implement. That is the system telling you the fluid is low or the pump is beginning to wear. These are not emergencies, they are announcements. The farmer who hears the announcements can address them in the shop on a Tuesday evening. The farmer who misses them addresses them in the field during the planting window with a neighbor standing by, watching the rain clouds build to the west. The fourth is what Leonard called the 2-minute check. Before every field session, he walked around the tractor, looked at the oil level, looked at the coolant, looked at the hydraulic fluid, checked that the hitch pins were all where they were supposed to be and the implement safety chains were connected. Checked the tire pressure by feel. 2 minutes every session before he climbed into the seat. He had been doing this since Alton showed him how in 1945. He had been doing it for 45 years by the time he handed the farm to his son. He had done it when it was cold and he did not want to. He had done it when he was running late and every minute felt like a penalty. He had done it when the field was ready and the weather was perfect, and stopping for 2 minutes felt like unnecessary delay. He had never had a field session where the 2-minute check had not been worth doing. He had had several field sessions where the 2-minute check had caught something: a low tire, a loose hitch pin, a coolant level that was down 3 inches from where it had been the morning before. That would have been a much larger problem if he had climbed into the seat and driven to the field without looking. Subscribe to The Honest Farmer and tell me in the comments, what is the maintenance habit on your farm that you inherited from your father or grandfather? Let me tell you about the 45 years, because 45 years without missing a planting season is not luck, and it deserves the full accounting. Leonard Puit planted his first crop in 1958 and his last crop in 2003. 45 planting seasons. In those 45 years, the farm ran 2 primary tractors: the 1952 vintage red row crop tractor from 1958 through 1971, replaced then by a used large vintage red farm tractor that Leonard bought at an estate auction in 1971 and ran through 1989, replaced then by a used large vintage red farm tractor that his son helped him select in 1989 and that Leonard maintained through his retirement. 3 tractors in 45 years, all purchased used, all maintained on Alton's schedule, none of them new, none of them financed. In 45 planting seasons, Leonard did not lose a single planting day to an equipment failure he had not already addressed before the failure became a lost day. Not one. This does not mean the equipment did not fail. Equipment fails. Hoses weep. Belts break. Bearings wear. Parts wear to the end of their service life and require replacement. In 45 planting seasons, Leonard had equipment failures during or immediately before the planting window approximately 18 times that he could recall. Every one of those 18 failures was addressed within the same day, either because he had the spare part in the cabinet or because he had caught the developing problem in the pre-season maintenance and had the part ordered before the season started. He had not been lucky. He had been prepared. The preparation cost him time every winter and every spring. Time in the shop, time on the maintenance list, time building and maintaining the parts inventory, time doing the 2-minute check before every field session when the field was ready and every instinct said, skip it today. The preparation cost him perhaps 40 hours per year in maintenance time above what an unprepared farmer would have spent. 40 hours per year times 45 years is 1,800 hours of preventive maintenance time across his farming career. In return, he never missed a planting season. The going rate for a missed planting day in Champaign County, Illinois, measured in the yield drag from late planting, varied across the 45 years from approximately $800 per lost day in the early years to $3,000 per lost day in the later years, as yields and corn prices rose. At the midpoint of that range, a single missed planting day cost approximately $1,800 in yield loss on a 360-acre operation. One missed planting day would have erased the entire 40-year investment in preventive maintenance. He never missed one. Let me tell you about the one time Leonard came closest to missing a planting day, because the closest call is where the preparation proved itself most clearly. In April of 1981, during the first week of the planting window, the 1206's water pump failed. Not a slow leak, a catastrophic seal failure that lost the entire coolant system in approximately 4 minutes of operation after the failure point. Leonard had been at the field edge when the temperature gauge climbed hard. He had shut the engine down before it overheated severely. He had a spare water pump for the 1206 in the parts cabinet. He had put it there in 1977, when the original pump had started showing a slight weep at the seal. He had replaced the original pump then, put the weeping pump on the bench, rebuilt the seal, and put the rebuilt pump in the parts drawer as the spare. The spare pump had been in the drawer for 4 years. He drove back to the shop. He pulled the failed pump. He installed the spare. He refilled the cooling system. He drove back to the field. Total time lost, 3 hours and 40 minutes. He did not miss the planting day. He finished the field. He planted the following day. He finished the planting season on schedule. The water pump that had sat in the parts drawer for 4 years, rebuilt from a weeping pump that most farmers would have discarded, had been the difference between a 3-hour delay and a lost planting day. Alton had said, "Take care of the tractor, and the tractor will take care of you." The rebuilt spare pump in the drawer was the tractor taking care of Leonard. The 4 years it had sat there without being needed was the cost of being prepared. The 3 hours and 40 minutes it saved in April of 1981 was the return on that cost. Let me tell you what Leonard said to his son Dennis when he handed over the farm in 2003, because the handover conversation is where the inheritance becomes explicit for the first time. Dennis had been working the farm alongside Leonard for 8 years. He knew the equipment. He knew the maintenance schedule. He had been doing the 2-minute check before every field session since Leonard had shown him how in 1983, when Dennis was 16, he knew where the parts cabinet was and what was in it. Leonard had sat with him at the kitchen table the winter before the handover and had gone through everything: the maintenance schedule for each piece of equipment, the parts inventory list, the service intervals, the pre-season checklist. Not because Dennis did not know these things, because Leonard wanted to say them explicitly one time, the way Alton had said the sentence explicitly one time when Leonard was 14. He had said, "Your grandfather told me take care of the tractor, and the tractor will take care of you." He had paused. "I didn't miss a planting season in 45 years. He had looked at Dennis. "That sentence is why." Dennis had nodded. Leonard had said, "The sentence sounds simple." He had looked at the maintenance schedule on the table. He had said, "The schedule is what the sentence actually means." He paused. Do the schedule, do the check. Keep the spare in the drawer. He looked at Dennis. "The tractor will take care of you." Dennis has farmed the Champaign County ground since 2003. He has not missed a planting season. Alton said it once in 1945 to a 14-year-old boy. Leonard said it once in 2003 to a 36-year-old man. Dennis has not needed to say it yet, because his children are still too young to farm alongside him. He will say it when the time comes. The sentence will pass the same way it has always passed. Once, as an observation rather than an instruction, to someone who has already been watching the practice for long enough to understand what the sentence means. Take care of the tractor, and the tractor will take care of you. Alton meant it. Leonard proved it. Dennis is proving it. The sentence is 45 years of planting seasons and one spare water pump that sat in a drawer for 4 years waiting to be needed. It was needed. It was there. Subscribe to The Honest Farmer. Hit the bell. Tell me in the comments, What did your father or grandfather say once about farming that you have been proving right ever since? That is the whole sentence. 45 years. Not one missed planting season. The tractor took care of Leonard because Leonard took care of the tractor. The schedule is on the shop wall. The parts drawer is full. The 2-minute check happens before every session. It will happen this spring. It will happen every spring after that. The sentence is still true. Let me tell you about the specific content of the parts cabinet. Because the parts cabinet is Alton's system made physical, and understanding what was in it explains why it worked. Alton had built the parts cabinet in 1941 from pine boards, a wall-mounted unit with 24 wooden drawers, each drawer labeled on the front with a piece of white tape and a pencil marking. Each drawer contained the spare parts for a specific system on a specific piece of equipment. The labels were written in Alton's handwriting. SM hydraulic hoses, SM fan belts, SM water pump seal, disc bearing seals, planter drive chains, and so on, through every wear item on every machine. When Leonard took over the farm in 1958, the cabinet had been on the shop wall for 17 years. Some of the drawers still had parts that Alton had put in them. Some had been used and restocked. Leonard had looked at the cabinet in his first spring of full responsibility and had done 2 things. He had gone through every drawer and confirmed that the spare was still serviceable. Not all of them were. The rubber hoses had aged, some of the seals had hardened, and he had replaced the aged items with new ones. He had then added new drawers for the implements he was adding that his father had not run. He had spent $340 that first spring on restocking and expanding the parts cabinet. He had thought about this expenditure for a while. $340 in 1958 was real money. He had concluded that $340 spent on the parts cabinet before the season was better than $340 spent at the dealer during the season, plus the time cost of the dealer trip, plus the yield cost of the delay. He had stocked the cabinet and not thought about the $340 again. The cabinet had been on the shop wall for 62 years by the time Dennis took over in 2003. The pine boards were darkened from decades of shop air and oil mist. Some of the drawers stuck in humid weather. The labels had been rewritten several times as Alton's pencil markings faded and Leonard's replaced them, and Leonard's faded and Dennis's replaced those. But the system was the same system Alton had built in 1941, in the same location on the same wall, with the same principle. One spare of everything that would lose you a day if it failed during the window. Dennis has kept the cabinet. He has added rows for the newer equipment. He has converted some of the wooden drawers to plastic bins. The principle is the same. The wall is the same. The system is the same. The spare water pump that saved the 1981 planting day had been in a drawer labeled 1206 water pump. The drawer had been empty for 4 years before Leonard put the rebuilt pump in it. It had been full again for 4 years before Leonard needed it. When he took the pump from the drawer in April of 1981, the drawer was empty again. He put a new pump in it that fall after harvest. It sat there for 9 more years until the 1206 was retired in 1989. He sold the pump with the tractor. He put a spare pump for the large vintage red farm tractor in a new drawer that fall. The drawer was never empty for more than 1 season. The rule was simple. When you used the spare, Restocking the spare is the first item on the next off-season maintenance list. Not something you will get to. The first item. Let me tell you about the 2-minute check in more detail, because Dennis has passed it to his own children, and the description his children have given of learning it is the clearest version of what Alton started and what has carried forward. Dennis has 2 children, a daughter, Mara, who is 17, and a son, Cole, who is 15. Both of them have been coming to the field with Dennis for years. Both of them know how to run the 7140 in field conditions. Both of them have been learning the maintenance list since they were old enough to hold a grease gun. The 2-minute check is the first thing Dennis taught each of them. Not how to drive, not how to set the planting depth. The 2-minute check, the walk around the tractor before every session, oil level, coolant level, hydraulic level, hitch pins, chains, tire pressure, before climbing into the seat. Mara had asked Dennis why they did the check every time if everything was always fine. Dennis had told her what Leonard had told him, because the one time everything is not fine, the check is the reason you find out before you drive to the field rather than in the field. Mara had said, "How often is something not fine?" Dennis had said, "Not often." He paused. "But once a season, maybe twice." He paused. "You wouldn't believe how often a hitch pin is loose, or a tire is down 3 pounds, or the coolant is low for no obvious reason." Mara had said, "And you find it in the 2-minute check?" Dennis had said, "Your great-grandfather found it in the 2-minute check. Your grandfather found it in the 2-minute check. I find it in the 2-minute check." He had looked at his daughter. "You will find it in the 2-minute check." Mara does the 2-minute check before every session now, not because she was told to, because she was shown what it looks like and why it matters, and she is the kind of person who does things that matter. Cole does it too. He is slower than Mara, because he is still learning what normal looks like versus what requires attention. He will be faster in 2 years. He will be reliable by the time he is old enough to take a field session alone. The 2-minute check is now in its 4th generation on the Puit farm. Alton started it. Leonard continued it. Dennis inherited it. Mara and Cole are learning it. It takes 2 minutes. It has never cost more than it saved. It will cost 2 minutes every session for the rest of the time anyone named Puit farms this Champaign County ground. Let me tell you the last thing, which is the thing Leonard said at the kitchen table in the winter of 2003 that he had not planned to say. He had gone through the maintenance schedule and the parts inventory and the preseason checklist. He had said the sentence, Alton's sentence, and he had connected it to the schedule the way it needed to be connected for Dennis to understand that the sentence was not a sentiment, but a program. He had been putting on his coat to go back to the shop when Dennis had asked him, "Did you ever have a year when you thought the sentence might not be true? When the tractor was going to fail you no matter what you did?" Leonard had thought about this. He said, 1988. Dennis said, "What happened in 1988? Leonard said, "The drought." He paused. "You can't prevent a drought with a maintenance schedule." He looked at Dennis. The tractor ran perfectly in 1988. The crop was thin anyway because there was no rain. He paused. "The tractor took care of me." He paused. "The rain didn't." Dennis had nodded. Leonard had said, "The sentence is about what you can control." He put on his hat. He said, "You can control the maintenance. You can control the parts cabinet, You can control the 2-minute check. He paused. The sentence is about those things. He paused. It is not about the rain. He had gone to the shop. Dennis had sat at the table for a while. The sentence is about what you can control. Alton understood this in 1932 when he was farming in the Depression with $180 worth of worn-out tractor and a determination that the farm would not fail on something he could have prevented. He could not prevent the Depression. He could maintain the tractor. He could keep the spare in the drawer. He could do the check before every session. He did all three. He said the sentence once. Leonard heard it once. He did all three for 45 years. He did not miss a planting season. Dennis heard it once. He has been doing all three since 2003. Mara and Cole are learning all three now. The sentence is still true. It will be true this spring. It will be true every spring as long as someone on this Champaign County ground does the schedule and keeps the spare in the drawer and walks around the tractor before climbing into the seat. Take care of the tractor. The tractor will take care of you. The rain is the rain. The rest is yours. Let me tell you about the specific yield data Leonard kept. Because Leonard was a man who wrote things down, and the numbers he recorded across 45 years are the proof that the sentence worked in the way that agricultural science would predict it worked. Leonard kept a crop notebook, a composition book, one per decade, started by Alton in 1932 and continued through the handover to Dennis in 2003. Each year had an entry, field by field, planting date, planting population, variety, in-season notes, harvest date, yield per acre. 71 years of Champaign County corn and soybean yields in 5 composition books. The entries were specific. Leonard had noted, in the annual summaries, the planting dates for each field and the reasons for any delayed planting. In 45 years of entries, under his handwriting, the reasons for delayed planting were weather 38 times, ground conditions 4 times, and equipment waiting on repair from a neighboring farm that used his planter twice in the early 1960s. Not once, in 45 years of Leonard's entries, did the word equipment appear as the reason for his own delayed planting. Not once. The county average yield data for Champaign County corn was available from the USDA extension records, and Leonard had tracked it alongside his own yields since the late 1960s when the county data became consistently available. His yields ran 8 to 12% above the county average across the period. Not dramatically, not in a way that would make him famous, but consistently, year after year, better than the county average by a margin that compounded over decades into a meaningful difference in the farm's financial position. Part of this yield advantage was his soil management. Leonard followed his father's crop rotation and cover crop practices, which were a different and longer story, but part of it was planting date. The research on planting date and yield in corn is unambiguous. Planting on time in the optimal window produces more corn than planting late. Every day of delayed planting after the optimal date in Champaign County, Illinois, costs approximately 1 to 2 bushels per acre per day. Leonard never paid that cost. His neighbors paid it in the years their equipment failed during the window. His neighbor, Phil Custer, from the April 1969 hydraulic hose incident, had told Leonard at the elevator in the fall of 1969 what those 60 late-planted acres had cost him. He had said 18 bushels an acre. He had shaken his head. He had said, "I know you had a hose go that morning." Leonard had said, "I had a spare." Phil had said, "I know." He had looked at his truck. He said, "I'm going to start keeping spares." Phil had started keeping spares in 1970. He had kept them every year after that. He had never lost another planting day to a missing part. One conversation at an elevator in the fall of 1969 had changed Phil Custer's farming practice. One sentence from Alton Puit in 1945 had produced the spare in Leonard's cabinet that had produced the conversation. The sentence travels. The practice travels with it. Leonard had not told Phil the sentence. He had just told Phil he had a spare. Phil had drawn his own conclusions. Let me tell you what is in the parts cabinet today, because the cabinet has changed over 70 years, and understanding what it holds now versus what Alton built describes the evolution of the system across 3 farming generations. Alton's original 24 drawers covered 2 tractors and 6 implements. His inventory was entirely mechanical. Hoses, belts, seals, bearings, shear bolts, points, and condenser for the magneto. The most sophisticated electrical component in Alton's cabinet was a spare set of ignition points. Leonard expanded the cabinet to 40 drawers and added hydraulic system components, hose assemblies, O-ring kits, pump seals, as the equipment became more hydraulically sophisticated through the 1960s and 1970s. He added a section for the planter's electronic seed monitors in the 1980s, when the monitors became standard equipment, and when he learned the hard way in 1984 that a failed seed monitor sensor could not be replaced from the dealer's stock in less than 3 days. He had ordered 2 replacement sensors that fall and put them in a labeled drawer. He had needed one of them in 1987. He had ordered a replacement for it that fall. Dennis added a section for the precision agriculture components in the 2000s. GPS antenna, display connectors, row clutch solenoids. The principles are identical to what Alton started. 1 spare of every component that would lose you a planting day if it failed during the window. The technology has changed. The principle has not. The cabinet is on the same wall where Alton mounted it in 1941. The pine boards have been reinforced twice. Once by Leonard in 1978 when the lower section was sagging, once by Dennis in 2009 when he added a section of new drawers above the original cabinet. The original drawers are darker than the newer ones. You can see where the system grew by the color of the wood. Mara knows what is in every drawer. She has been through the inventory with Dennis twice. Once when she was 14 and once when she was 16 and taking on more responsibility for the preseason maintenance. She could close her eyes and tell you what is in the drawer labeled 7140 water pump without looking at the label. She knows it is there. She knows why it is there. She knows that the day it is not there is the day something is going to need it. This is what Alton built in 1941 with pine boards and 24 drawers, and the specific knowledge of a man who had watched too many of his neighbors lose planting days to missing parts. What he built was not a parts cabinet. What he built was a system for converting maintenance time into planting day reliability. The parts cabinet was the physical expression of the system. The system was the sentence, "Take care of the tractor will take care of you." 71 years of composition book entries. Not one equipment failure listed as the reason Leonard Puit missed a planting day. The cabinet on the wall, the schedule on the clipboard, the 2-minute check before every session. This spring, Dennis will do the check. Mara will do the check. Cole will do the check with Dennis standing beside him, telling him what normal looks like. versus what requires attention. The sentence is in its fourth generation. It is still true. It will be true this spring. It will be true as long as someone does the work that makes it true.